Welcome back to the VR Customs Workshop, the heart of Vendetta Racing. Today we're going to be talking about what worked and what didn't work on our little trip to Bonneville last year and what we're doing to sort it out. Stay tuned. So a bit of history on this project for those who have not been following over the years. The project started in late 2022 and we started cutting steel for the frame in early 2023. So all of 2023 was taken up building the bike, understanding the design. We had the engine, that's the only thing we had to start with was the engine. Everything else we built around it. We decided on Aprilia wheels and an Aprilia swing arm, mostly because there was a donor bike available. My preference was to use a Ducati swing arm because it's a Ducati bike, but I'd sold it. I had a 1098 swing arm lying around and I'd sold it and the purchaser wouldn't sell it back to me. So the alternative was the Aprilia, which in hindsight works out better because you can put a smaller size sprocket on the wheel, which you would never be able to do with a Ducati being a single-sided hub. We got the engine built, we dynoed the bike in a different chassis. We had to make a Frankenstein chassis, an old 1098 chassis. Stole front end and back end off my old race bike so we could fit it on a bike dyno just for the length. Even the fuel tank was sitting external to the side, but it was purely just to get the thing dialed in. Once that was done, put the engine back in the chassis, checked everything for fitment, stripped the entire thing down, painted it, powder coated it, rebuilt it ready for testing. We partnered with Yes Marina Racing Circuit, who I've got a long history with them for sponsored many years ago in circuit racing and working with them as an instructor at the track. So they agreed to lend us their drag strip. So we did a whole evening of runs back up and down the drag strip just to understand how the bike would handle, how speed would affect it. Not that we got fast, it's only a quarter mile, but it was a good learning process, good to get some footage. Silly little niggly things of getting the bike off the line was learned from there. So from that it was then boxed up and sent over to Bonneville. We did 7 runs in total, 3 were failures. The first 2 runs were failed due to clutch issues. Actually, one was a rear brake, which then turned into a clutch issue. The second was purely a clutch issue. And runs 5 or 6, I can't remember which, we blew the plenum chamber off the inlets, just with too much boost pressure. The rest of the runs was successful. Final run was our fastest run with a 188 top speed and a 182.5 average. Pretty close to the SCTA record of 193, and we far beat the FIM record, which was 166, which was our original goal. So the first box was ticked. Once being there, we realized we were so close to the ultimate record, we decided to come straight back and do it again, but learn from our mistakes and learn from what we learned over there. So traction was our biggest issue, vision was our second biggest issue, and then a host of all smaller issues, clutch problems and placements of oil coolers and things like that. So we're now in the process of modifying the bike, getting it prepped so we can go back to Bonneville in August, September this year, which is a big ask because Bonneville from Dubai is literally the other side of the world. So we do have a lot to get through before this thing has to be tested, packed and back in a container before we can trial it again. So in front of me is a collection of things that did and didn't survive our little Bonneville trip. Starting with the easiest parts, the chain. It did survive the runs, it worked perfectly, but did not survive the 3 months travel home in the container. It was a brand new chain, it was lubricated, but clearly just the salt lying on it and a bit of moisture, I had to cut it off with a grinder to get the bike out of the container. Fork bearings, which we looked at in an earlier video, they did their job on the salt, but again did not manage the trip home, so they've all been replaced. Clutches, I've honestly lost count how many clutches we've been through with this project. I think we changed at least 3, maybe 4 when we were out there. It's definitely a weak point of the bike. It's something that we are addressing, which we're talking about in a bit. The various ball joints and things that we've got through the bike. This was one of the gear linkage. Did not make the grade. It worked on the salt, but the travel back didn't work. Rear caliper, which looks like it was lying in a swamp for the last 2 years. That's just a horrendous rusty mess. Various hose clips, which we thought were stainless steel, but they're clearly 306 stainless steel, so we've learned from that one. The big one, the piston, which seems to be missing the skirt, and the matching cylinder, which has managed to crack all the way on the inside and all the way down the outside. That's a special kind of stupid to do that. Moving back, we have the mudguard. This did make the grade, but it's a modification. This is what's been cut off. We can go to the mudguard. I'll tell you about that in a bit. The under tray did survive, but bare aluminium. The pitting and the salt is horrendous. It's cheap aluminium. We can replace it. But again, it just shows you what the damage of salt can do. And the oil cooler, which looks like a snow cone. So we've learned a lot from that as well. This one is going to be kept and framed, and this was actually cleaned every single run. So that's from one run of salt, just collecting there. And the oil cooler sits over 2 meters behind the front wheel, and it's still collected all that. So lots of learning processes. So let's look it over bit by bit. Starting at the front of the bike, the second biggest issue we had when we were doing runs on the salt was vision. The original mudguard stopped right here, and it curved all the way down to the bottom. The regulations state that you have to have 210 degrees of wheel visible. So there's only so much size a mudguard can be. At the time, during the design phase, the thought process was keep the bottom more protected to keep the salt out of the inside of the bike, and we stuck the mudguard there. What we didn't realise how much salt spray would come over all the way around the wheel, and the salt spray was coming straight out the front and straight into my face. Now we had a camera sitting here, and you can actually see it on the camera. It's spraying everywhere. So even within the first half mile, your vision's compromised, and you're just looking at a vague line and some fuzzy flags at each side. It's not the best. You can't see anything. So solution was is we extended the front mudguard. Wanted to retain the original mounting of it, so there was no, or not as much, re-engineering to be done. Extended the front and chopped off the rear. So we still have 210 degrees of wheel visible. We will have to adjust the side panel somewhat, so you can actually see it. That's what the regulations want, but that's not an issue. So, one modification done. We have a little support which bolts between the caliper and the mudguard just to stop it bouncing around at speed, and it's pretty stable. So, small, easy modification to start with. Another modification that we're looking at is boxing in the front part of the bike to separate the back of the tire to my face. We don't know how much salt spray was coming up the way through here, but the plan is to box in this part completely. This is just a trial piece of aluminium, and from there we can lay some brush in here to mold to the same shape as the mudguard. So as we can turn the wheel, we're always getting contact with the surface, so no salt can come through it, or less salt can come through it. We'll try it. It may not work, but it doesn't hurt to try. Another modification we're doing is repositioning the oil cooler. Now, when we did the design phase of this bike, we mounted the oil cooler slightly below the chassis rails, so the air underneath the bike would cool it. And we chose the standard cooler because we've never had any experience with oil being too hot in the past. Now, to give you an idea of where the cooler sits, it's 2.1 meters from the center of the front wheel. And you would think there would be more than enough distance to stop the oil cooler getting impacted with salt, but how wrong were we? So the new format will be a different oil cooler, a lot larger than the standard one, both in face and width. So that'll give us more oil volume to cool, and we're going to position it roughly here on the inside of the bike to keep it cool, because obviously there's panels down the side of this bike. We will be running a NACA duct. Not this one, this is just a test piece to give us a shape, but we'll probably 3D print some NACA ducts, and we'll fit them in there, duct air directly through the oil cooler, and from there the air coming out will then run through the intercooler, which is missing here, and the radiator. On top of this, we'll have more ducting down the side of this bike to make sure we get air coming in to cool the intercooler and the radiator. One of the other things we're going to do is extend the bottom panel, because it used to stop here. We're going to extend it all the way to the back and box in the underside, so all the air going into the intercooler and the radiator is clean air, either coming from the side where it's clean or coming through the center where it will be clean. Another modification will be the addition of a foot brake. Now, we never ran a foot brake before. We had a thumb brake on the left hand bar. Thought process was that when the bike started to wheel spin, we may be able to dampen out with applying a little bit of the rear brake. We were clearly dreaming, but the regulations state you have to have a rear brake. So we're going to fit one on our foot, and that will allow us to move everything in the bars in, which will reduce a lot of the wind impact on the upper body, which we did see was a massive issue. So a foot brake is going to be fitted.